Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sweet Empowerment Podcast. I am really super excited to have my next guest, Dr. Kate Lund, joined me because we talked probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was on her podcast and I immediately vibed with her energy. I can spot someone that is doing some really beautiful work in the world, and she was one of those people. And I immediately said, "Can I have you on my podcast?" So I want to first read you a little bit about Dr. Kate's background, is what I prefer to call her, Dr. Kate. And so we can get started on this podcast, and then I will introduce her to all of you. Dr. Kate Lund is a licensed clinical psychologist, peak performance coach, best-selling author, and TEDx speaker. With a specialized training in medical psychology, she uses a strength and evidence-based approach to help parents and children build resilience so they can thrive in school, sports, and life. During Dr. Kate's childhood, she faced and eventually overcame a childhood illness, so she learned at an early age to believe in the possibilities that exist on the other side of challenges. Oh, that gave me chills and it made my eyes tear up. Welcome, Dr. Kate. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. So I just want to jump right in and ask you the very first question to start right from the beginning about, can you tell us a little bit about the event in your childhood that helped you build this resilience?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So, when I was 4, I was diagnosed with a condition called hydrocephalus, which essentially means that the cerebral spinal fluid isn't circulating as it should and pressure builds up on your brain. So, as a 4-year-old, and this can happen to you at any age, but, I was 4. And as a 4-year-old, what that meant is, I was throwing up sort of randomly and uncontrollably, oftentimes in the middle of the night because of pressure differentials. I was dizzy, I had horrible headaches, and I wasn't really able to articulate fully at 4 what was going on. I was just sick and not feeling well, and it was really hard for my parents to figure out, along with the doctors, obviously, what exactly was going on because it was kind of intermittent at first. And finally, the hydrocephalus was diagnosed. And the good thing about hydrocephalus is that it can be managed with something called a shunt, which is essentially a pump or tube that's inserted in your brain, and it circulates the spinal fluid for you. Problem is, shunts break, particularly in childhood. So what this meant was a lot of time in and out of the hospital, a lot of time coming back to school, looking different, feeling different, having to catch up when catching up was hard, that kind of thing. So, it was hard. It was really, really hard. The positive in it was that I had a lot of support, a lot of really good support. My parents, my teachers, parents of friends, they really helped me to focus on what I could do as opposed to what I couldn't do. And that really helped me make up the gaps, right? They helped me to see myself as the child I was, as opposed to a sick kid sitting on the sidelines. Because when my shunt was working, I really wasn't sick. I was well. It just so happened that when the shunt broke, then I wasn't well and it had to be
Mhm.
fixed. So it was a lot of up and down and back and forth from that perspective. Uh, and that really is the catalyst for what I think sparked my interest in this idea of resilience, brought me to the point of becoming a psychologist, and really, has been at the foundation of my work in my mind. I don't share this with the people I work with,
Mhm.
uh, but, a foundation in my mind for the work that I do, and has really, I think, helped me to connect with people, those I work with, those I, just have in my life on a really human level, an authentic level.
Yes. Wow. That's I understand that completely. It's interesting to me as the more people I talk to through life, that I see that there's something that started to present in childhood and it just kind of can organically turn into our life's work because there's a passion behind it. It's just not a, hey, I think that sounds like a good idea to go be that person, you know?
Right, yeah, there's a real passion, sort of a real human connection
Mhm.
within it that can draw folks in, and certainly did draw me in.
Yes. Just real quick for my own curiosity, because you said this started at 4, but you were talking about being in school. Was this a years and years process type thing? And like, when did the stunt come out? Stint or stunt?
It's called a shunt.
Shunt. Sorry, excuse me.
And actually, to be honest, I still have it. So
Oh, interesting.
it never comes out. So that's just kind of the way it is. So this was so the process, I mean, it went on through my adolescence, through my early adulthood, and we're good, hopefully now, knock on wood.
You are.
Um,
We're
I don't,
declaring it so.
and we're declaring it so. But yeah, this is not something that really goes away in childhood. This
Oh,
is, yeah.
interesting. I have a little bit of knowledge, a tiny, tiny bit of knowledge, because one of my neighbor's children one of my houses had this. And I remember them talking about it and just kind of watching it from afar of,
Right.
what they were, and the child looked fine and healthy. And I really didn't understand what was happening, but this is
Mhm.
really good information. It kind of reminds me of that, and how dedicated those parents were as well. And that child was thriving and is still thriving to this day. So,
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about, right? And that's the hope. That's the hope that it goes in that direction for sure. Because yeah, when my shunt was working, I was on the tennis court. I was
wow.
playing competitive tennis. I was, doing well in school. And that's another thing, my parents really saw me as that kid that I was and what I was able to do, as opposed to seeing me based on my challenges and my limitations, which definitely had to be managed and managed through and addressed. Of course they do. But on the other side of that coin, there's always so much more. And to really focus on those things as well is so important.
I want to talk to you about two things. One, I want to talk to you about the emotions and feelings of children, but also of the parents, because we know as parents, watching our children go through something can be just hell on earth. It's so hard for a parent to watch their child struggling, because when they come into this world, we want all the greatest things, all the rainbows and butterflies for our babies. And when they run up against certain obstacles in their life, man, as a parent, we really have to get our act together to be able to show up for them. So first, let's dive into the feelings of a child. And I know this will translate into your work now as, a grown professional in that. But the feelings that we run across when we appear, like when not we appear, when there is something that is happening that's challenging in our life. I know
Mhm.
some of the feelings are, I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I can't do this. It'll never get better. Is this the type of feelings that you felt, or that the people you work with and help, do they run across those type of things? And if yes, how do you help them move through those type of things?
Absolutely. Those are very common feelings, particularly when there's a challenge of any sort, but particularly a challenge which really makes the child feel set apart from their peers. And it's a hard reality, and it's definitely something that I experienced, like when I was coming back to school looking different, half a head of hair, and just really feeling set apart. For me, I think the support that I was getting on the outside, sort of to focus on the things I could do as opposed to the things I couldn't do, helped me to slowly but surely move back into the mix
Mm.
and move forward. I learned also, though, and I think this is really important for kids who are struggling on any level and with a challenge, medical, physical, or otherwise, to really appreciate their own unique context,
Ooh.
not to be comparing themselves with their peers, not to be thinking, well, I've got to be like them, but rather to really appreciate who they are within their own unique context. And that's what I help, the kids I work with to do. I help the parents to see their children in that way, and, to really focus on the strengths that exist within their child's context despite the challenge. And I think that's the really important thing to internalize over time. And it's a process. There's no one size fits all. There's no button we can push. There's no equation we can run to make this happen. It's more a process that has to unfold through a human relationship. So that's, a therapist or a parent or a teacher helping the children, helping the child to see, well, what is possible for me despite this challenge, despite this really hard thing, And so
Or
that, I think, is the key.
are all those people together, the whole "it takes a village" thought,
Mhm.
right? I love that. I
Yes.
love that. I love that people can that it doesn't have to be all on one person, because that can happen where the parents aren't doing anything. It's all on the therapist, or,
Right.
you know, or it's all on the school teachers. Like, this can happen, but it sounds like you had such a nice rounded thing. And the word I wrote down while you were talking, Dr. Kate, was comparison.
Mm,
We know
yes.
gosh, my gosh, as humans, we're so wired to look outside and say, he has that, she has that, they're better at this. And,
Mhm.
you know, using the words your own unique context. Now, I have not heard it said like that, but this is something that I did with my children, and they thanked me for later.
Yeah.
Is, as grown, I still have one that's 17, but the two that are grown, nearing their 30s,
Mhm.
they both have said to me, "Thank you for not trying to make us into someone else. Thank you for celebrating who we are as
Yes.
individuals and really exemplifying our strengths." My daughter is very outspoken, and she's the one that sounds good. I'm gonna jump without thinking about it. And my
Mhm.
son, the one right after him, 19 months apart, is very introspective. So he
Right.
sits and has to ponder and ponder, and neither one of them are wrong, neither one of them are right. It was
Right.
about letting them just be who they are. But before we get too far off that, I wanna go back to talking about parents, like what they can do, not only now the challenge, dealing with a child with some type of challenge, mental,
Mhm.
emotional, physical, whatever it may be, but also the children that don't have the challenges. There's still those type of challenges, the real big ones. There's still challenges. I mean, this
Of
is a whole
course.
thing.
Of
This is a
course.
whole thing.
Right, of course, because none of us are immune to challenge, right? Challenge is everywhere. And so regardless of whether it's a, medical challenge, physical challenge, kids will have challenge regardless.
Mhm.
It's gonna show up in some form. Absolutely. That's a really good point.
So how can parents show up effectively? Because I know for me as a parent, and I talked about this briefly when I was on your podcast, that I had to
Mhm.
work on me to be
Mhm.
an effective parent. So do you have any words of advice that you could share with parents that are just dealing with children in general, or children with a certain type of challenge, like real medical challenge or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it really comes down, and this is, again, easier said than done, but caring for ourselves as parents, because I'm living this right now myself with 15-year-old twin boys and lots of ups and downs within that
Yeah.
context, right? And
Yep.
they hit challenges, and I'm not always the best at managing that challenge in my mind. I'm not overt with them. I really want to kind of keep things modulated around them, but I definitely will feel the stress when they're struggling. And so, what it comes down to is knowing what our go tos are as parents to care for ourselves. And what I always recommend, and what's so important, is this idea of finding some way each day to modulate your stress response so that you're
Mm.
not starting in an escalated place when a challenge hits, such that you're going to escalate even more to the point of shutdown. You want to really be keeping things from a stress response perspective, even day in, day out. Again, easier said than done, but really consistently practicing some sort of a technique or way or thing that you do in your life day to day that will help you sort of quiet your mind and bring that foundational stress response down.
Oh.
And mindfulness, meditation, it can be exercise, it can be sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, just something to quiet your mind each day consistently so that you're in a position to better manage through a stressor or a challenge when it hits.
It's that putting your oxygen mask on first situation. We
Yes.
gotta we gotta
Yes.
take care of ourselves, and for me, I know that for sure. And once my kids, I did a lot of my parenting with single parenting, and
Mhm.
there's times when they're too young and you really can't break away from them, but boy,
Right.
when they went to bed, that was me, and I had to
Yes.
reset, reconfigure, do whatever I needed to do. I remember I took a lot of baths during that time.
Mhm.
It was like they went in bed and I got in the bathtub and I just deep breathed, and decompressed.
Yes, absolutely. That's excellent. That's spot on because
Yeah.
exactly what you want to be doing. Got to care for ourselves as parents if we're going to be able to show up for our kids, particularly when there's a challenge involved.
Yes, yes. So you brought up the word mindfulness. Let's talk
Mhm.
about mindfulness because there's so many words that are thrown around in the world today, but
Mhm.
does anybody really sit down and look up the definition and say, what exactly is mindfulness? Like I have my idea what that is, but I would love
Right.
to hear what your definition or thoughts around mindfulness is.
Absolutely. And it really comes back to being mindful or focused on what's happening around you, kind of being able to take that step back and observe as opposed to reacting to everything. You want to being mindful really allows us to respond as opposed to react
Mhm.
because it helps us to manage our stress response, sort of consistently in an even way. So that's what I would say about mindfulness. And it,
Yeah.
really is that ability to take a step back and gain a perspective on what's happening around you. Because when we're reacting all the time, that takes energy, that takes an emotional toll. And that's not, as we know, an effective strategy and not a sustainable strategy.
Well, and I have found when I react, I am adding fuel to the fire rather
Hmm.
than if I slow down and just ground myself into what's really happening here rather than letting my emotion take over and which might promote me to say or do something that I would later wish I hadn't. So for me, it was
Right.
really slowing down and saying, what's really happening here? Would you consider that what's called mindfulness? Like, what's really going on?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely practicing mindfulness.
What would you suggest? Because the name of the title of this episode is about how to effectively manage emotions to maximize potential. There's so many delicious words in that title. I love effectively and I love
Yes.
manage and I love emotions and maximize and potential. So let's talk about what are some tools and techniques, excuse me, that we can learn to effectively manage our emotions? Because a lot of times people think, I think as humans, we think this emotion comes in, which is
Mhm.
really it's a chemical response to a thought. This emotion comes in, we feel it, and we think this is the end all be all, and we have to act on this thing, right?
Right.
So speak about that a little bit, Dr. Kate.
Right. Well, so the first thing we want to remember is that we're not our emotions, right? We're just not our emotions. But we've already kind of touched on this really important piece of managing our stress response. And
Yeah.
that is at the foundation, at the core of our ability to manage our emotions in an effective way, which will then help us to tolerate the frustrations that come about regardless of the cause of the frustration. It will also help us to move through and beyond those challenges that will come about because, as we know, none of us are immune to challenge. But then sort of building out from that foundational managing of the stress response, we want to be taking care, particularly as parents, that we're focusing on our social connections, that we're finding ways to engage in things that bring us joy. We're finding ways to practice gratitude.
Mm,
We're spending time out in nature. We're exercising. We know from all the research, as well as from the anecdotal evidence out there, that exercise and physical activity, some of the most powerful things we can do to manage mood state, manage our emotion, tolerate the frustration, and just be at our best. And if we're doing all of these things in a way that makes sense for us, again, within our own unique context, because all of these different techniques and tools aren't going to fit for every person. So it's a
mhm.
question of finding that constellation of tools and techniques that works for you. Putting those together will help you, will sit you up in the best way possible to move towards your potential so that you can thrive in whatever it is you're doing.
That's so beautifully said, and I love that you said finding your constellation. That's so fun. You mentioned some of my favorite things, which is gratitude, first of all. Gratitude,
Yes.
I believe that gratitude is the highest vibrational energy that we can possibly be in is gratitude and appreciation and being in the present moment, which is just the now moment where we're not in the past and we're not in the future. And those two things have really they've been paramount in me staying calm. And it's not, I didn't start doing it to stay calm. I
Mhm.
found this practice myself through when I had went through a really difficult time and I was a nervous wreck. That puts it lightly. I mean, I had lost a bunch of weight. I couldn't eat. It was a horrible divorce, a thing I called my tsunami that my listeners know already. And I just needed to get calm. So I was deeply breathing and I was doing these things. But what happened magically on the other side of that, and I was
Yeah.
hiking, I was grounding, I was doing all these things. I was
Right.
getting very present, but what magically happened is it was like this whole other arena of energy opened up around me. It's very
Mhm.
difficult to describe. Maybe you know what I'm talking about, but where I was in this little bubble in this ball, by
Right.
doing these things, I expanded, my energy expanded, my mind opened, my heart opened, and I was better able to receive more information that could help guide me more effectively than had I stayed in this little constricted, I think of a burr, like a little constricted burr with pokes on it, that it was in this little ball I was in. So
Yes.
yeah, what can you say about that?
Yeah, and I think that you really demonstrated through that experience the power of our ability to sort of the power in our ability to quiet our minds and what can happen when we do those things and when we intentionally plug in the strategies and the tools to care for ourselves in an optimal way, because it what we like to see happen happened with you. We expand, we create space, we move beyond that place of being stuck so that we can eventually move forward in the direction that we're meant to go. And
Yeah.
so the experience that you just shared illustrates that point beautifully.
It was something I did out of necessity that
Mhm.
ended up being one of my most favorite things. And
Yes.
I've learned over time that the more I because I have now felt what it feels like to be in that space, there is a contrast now to
Mhm.
that other space of, ah, frenetic all the time and lots of emotions and highs and lows and all of these things. Once I had that polarization that I could go, oh my gosh. So now when I touch into that frenetic space, I notice immediately. It's like,
Yes.
wow, this doesn't feel good because now my new normal has become the calm.
Yes, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. And you really have an awareness, a built in awareness that you've internalized of what it feels like to be out of that space,
Yeah.
which is so powerful.
So let's talk about resilience because it's such a great word. I was listening to a podcast the other day and I'm going to screw this up because I don't paraphrase well at all, but it was something like resilience is within all of us. It's just a matter of whether we tap into it or not. What are your thoughts on
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that, because we all have inner strength, we all have that ability to move through and beyond challenge, particularly when we need to. But not everybody recognizes that within
Mm,
themselves. And so, there's a dispositional component to resilience. Some folks are just more apt to be in that space of thinking, okay, I can persevere, I can overcome that challenge. Others have to sort of move in that direction over time through learning, conversation, connection, that sort of thing. But ultimately, resilience at a foundational level is this ability to move through and beyond challenge. But the key point is, and we've already kind of touched on it, we all do that in our own way within our own unique context. And some at a foundational level are more poised to do that from the get go than others. Some need a little bit more building time before they feel like, okay, I can manage through this, I can handle this, that kind of a thing. But once folks have come through and beyond a challenge, that will build their internal sense of being resilient in their minds.
I was going to ask you that. That was going to be my next question is does it build on itself?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's It's this idea that, sort of we can liken it to this idea of being held back by fear, not wanting to take that first step forward because we're afraid. But then once we push ourselves out of our comfort zone, we move in that direction of the fear and maybe through and beyond the fear. Next time, it's not going to be as hard. So
Ah,
it's the same thing with resilience. We do something that's hard, we move through and beyond that challenge. And then all of a sudden, we start seeing ourselves as more capable of managing through the next challenge. We see ourselves as more resilient.
this reminds me of a story, a short one. After I went through this decades of painful and lopsided relationships, and then I had my tsunami when I was in this state of anxiety and depression and fear and all the things that I had just spoken about.
Mm.
And then I did my healing work, and I had what I called the College of Kristen 2 years that I took off. Didn't know it was going to be 2 years, but that's what I called it.
Yeah.
And on the other side of this, I remember thinking about dating. And I
Mm.
was like, okay, this is might be an option now. And I remember that little fear coming in and saying, oh, but what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? And I remember my response was, I got a PhD in pain. I can handle if something happens. Because
Mhm.
I'm thinking now that's resilience. I was like, yeah,
Yes.
I've been through it. I could handle, if something else happens. Did I want
Mhm.
to have something else happen? No. But I had this mechanism inside of me that said, push through that fear.
Yes.
You can do this. You've done it
Mhm.
before. What's the worst that's going to happen if someone breaks your heart again? You're not going to die.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
that's resilience. That's internalized resilience, that you're using to build.
Do you think some kids that grew up in some very unfortunately abusive or toxic households build up some natural resilience?
Yes, it's very, very possible. It's very, very likely. It doesn't happen for all,
Okay.
but for many it does. And we
All
don't
right.
exactly know why some come out of situations like that extremely resilient, poised to move forward, you know, hit goals, and some don't. But, it's a mix for sure. But absolutely that kind of an early experience can certainly foster resilience.
Wow. This is making me think of one day, one of my girlfriends said to me, she said, you're never scared. Like you never act like you're scared. And I was like, I'm scared all day, every day. And she goes, well, then you must be very courageous. And this was about 10 years ago. And I sat on that for like a while as I
Mhm,
contemplate, I'm courageous and brave or whatever word you want to use. And I thought about it. I was like, why am I? And I was like, you know what? I kind of am. I
mhm.
am.
Yeah.
I will do the thing. But I
Yes.
asked myself why. And I believe it's because I grew up in a household with four brothers in a neighborhood full of boys. And they
Mhm.
were going to go do something that would appear scary to me, like we're going to go ride our bikes in the dark or go play ditch 'em in the dark or just do something that would appear scary. I don't mean like it was unlawful.
Right.
And if I thought about it,
Mhm.
they would leave and they'd be gone before I came up with a conclusion. So I
Mm.
had to learn to take that step. Like they say, you want to go? Yes.
Right.
Because if I didn't, then I was left behind. So is
Right.
that an example of how we can naturally form that? I've always thought that in my head, that's how that happened. But does that sound accurate?
Yeah, that sounds right about accurate. You were desensitizing to the fear in the moment because you didn't want to miss out.
That's a great way to say it, desensitizing to the fear. Yeah,
Mhm.
because or feeling it anyway, because I was like, well, again, asking ourselves question, what's really the worst that can happen here? Like I always tell myself to this day before I wrote my first blog ever, my first
Mhm.
podcast ever, I said, is anybody going to lose a limb or die because I send this blog? Like it
Right.
has to be that in my face to
Mhm.
to work past the fears. Like the worst case scenario, my kid's going to be taken from me because I send this blog. And if the answer is no, I hit send and I go,
Yeah.
okay. And I just
Right.
have to sit with it and nothing ever happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And was the fear, do you feel how folks were going to respond to the blog or the post, or was that
Oh, yeah, how I was gonna be seen. Yeah, whatever it is, and so, do you have any words for anybody who because I feel like a lot of people, Dr. Kate, I feel like we're all born with some beautiful brilliance and gifts and cool
Mhm.
stuff.
Yes.
And people are so afraid to share it because how they might be seen, or they have a fear of failure. I wanted to touch on the fear of failure. So, could you explain maybe what the fear of failure actually really is and how to either work with it? Or I'm not sure if we ever overcome it or if we just learn to manage it. What do you
Right.
think?
Well, yeah, so the fear of failure, I mean, that's huge, right? Because I actually believe quite strongly that failure is one of our biggest catalysts for success, particularly for our
Ooh,
kids.
juicy. Tell us.
This idea of being able to have things not work out the first time out of the gate, because that's a pretty common experience. And as parents, to help normalize that experience for our kids, help them get back up, problem solve, and try that same thing from another angle until they succeed, try and try again. Real value in that. And I think for me, that idea was crystallized as a kid because rarely did I win. I said I played tennis and I did. I played competitive tennis. Particularly, it was the sport that I gravitated towards because I really loved it, but it was also safe with my hydrocephalus. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't a contact sport. It was safe, right? So I could do that. And I was pretty good, but I was not the best. And I was okay with that, because I was doing the best I could within my own unique context. And I think that's the point. If a kid is poised to win and be the best, awesome, right? That wasn't me, right? I have a lot of runner-up trophies and that was fine. I
Yeah.
was like that was the best I could do. I knew I couldn't beat those top people and that was okay. There's still some of my best friends to this day, right? And so it didn't
Oh,
matter. Yeah, super super good part of my life was the whole tennis thing. And, I think that's a really important piece to teach our kids, right? There are kids who are going to be at the top, and that's cool. But if you're not, that's cool too, as long as you're doing your very best within your own unique context. And as
mhm.
long as you're getting up and trying again if you don't succeed the first time out of the gate, as long as you're desensitizing to that idea of, oh no, I can't do that because I might fail. No, no, no. The reason you should do it is because you might fail. So you can learn from that. You can use that as an opportunity to move forward. And it's much easier said than done, right? There's not, again, a one size fits all for this. There's not a button we can push, an equation we can run to make this happen. But it's sort of an experiential process that has to unfold for our kids with our guidance as parents, the guidance of teachers, the guidance of coaches, that sort of thing. And ultimately, I really do believe that if we help our kids to persevere, if we help them to keep pushing forward, they're gonna realize success of some sort within their own unique context.
Yes. You know what's interesting? I never used the word failure in my life. It wasn't even in my vocabulary.
Right.
And not for any reason. There's
Right.
no reason
Sure.
until I started this business and I was going to like marketing things and, trying to build my business and take all these classes. And then they kept saying to me, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. You're going to fail. And I was like, what do you mean I'm going to fail? What are you talking about? Because the way I translated what they see as failure, I
Mhm.
translate it as that didn't work. Let me try something else.
Right.
I just didn't
Right.
see it as failure. So I still
Mhm.
don't use that word failure. And even as you're talking, right, you'll agree that you may not have been the top tier gold medal in the whatever, but you didn't fail. You were
Exactly.
still playing freaking tennis with the big
Exactly.
dogs. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly, and that's a huge point, and I also don't love the word failure, and I rarely use it, but,
Yeah.
in these contexts, whatever, but it's sort of this idea of not succeeding the first time out of the gate or what have you, right? It doesn't mean it's failure, it just means that you didn't hit your goal the first time out of the gate, and there's a way around that, right? And, it's I really do believe that we don't have to win to succeed. I know there are a lot of folks out there who believe that, second place is just as good as losing. I don't believe that. I believe that If second place is the best that you're going to do within your own unique context, awesome. If it's third place or fourth place, awesome. You're out there, you're doing it, you're making it happen. And that's the piece that I think is so important to reinforce for our kids. And I've got an example that I can share.
Please, yes.
I mentioned my 15-year-old twins, and they're both rowing this season. And one of them has been doing it for a couple years and is very, very good. The other one just started this season, and he's good, but he's not at the same levels as his brother, and that's totally fine. And we're really happy that he's not competing with his brother. He's actually,
Yes.
and I think it's because I kind of am like a broken record player on these topics with him, because he's always struggled a little bit with sports and stuff like that relative to his brother.
Hmm.
Relative to the bigger world out there, he's fine, but it's just within the context of his
Yep.
twin, which makes it a little bit more intense. But had a big regatta this past weekend, and one of the boys was on a boat that won their division. They're actually going to be going on to the next round of races. The other one didn't actually win, but within his mind, it was a huge win because he did better than he did in the last regatta. And the fact that he can see that is
Oh,
really powerful. And he came back so happy with his own performance, as well as with the ability to celebrate and be excited about his brother's performance and really support him. So I feel like it's a pretty good example of
yes.
really capitalizing on your own strengths and skills within your own context. And don't get me wrong, he's got goals for next year. He's got plans for how he's going to build and improve, but he realizes he's been doing this for a couple years less than his brother has, and they're just in different places, but relative to his own experience, he's able to see how far has come this season, and it's amazing. So it's really
Yes.
exciting, and I'm really excited for both boys on this front,
Me too.
because they're sort of maximizing within their own unique contexts.
Oh my gosh. So I was a natural gymnast. I
Mm,
always wanted to be a
cool.
gymnast, always, always, always when I was little. And my parents didn't sign me up for whatever reason until I was like 14, 13 or 14. That's
Mm,
old to
for
start
gym, yeah.
gymnastics. Okay. And I'm strung pretty tightly. So we're talking like I'm not like that natural limber person. Like I had to work hard for my stretching and my splits and my stuff.
Yeah.
But I was in it for 1 year, and I got third in Arizona State in my class.
Awesome.
And I was like, that was as good as first to me. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is unreal that I even got third in
Right.
1 year in my
Yes.
class. I don't need first. I walk around like that third is first. I'm like, I got third in Arizona State in class 4 gymnastics,
That's awesome.
It was the
Yes.
lowest level. Right, it was class
Oh,
4 because I think it goes up to 1. It was the lowest level, but in 1 year, it actually was even maybe a summer. I don't even know. It wasn't very long that I was able to get that, and I also believe, Dr. Kate, that something that I stress a lot in my work and my teachings and those type of things too is to celebrate every little win. I don't
mhm.
care what that win is. The fact that you chose to have juice rather than soda today. Whatever
Mhm.
it might be, celebrate those wins because I believe that builds resiliency because we start to believe in ourselves, even with the teeny tiny small stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that really goes along with this idea of focusing on the things that did go well on a given day, as opposed to all of the would haves, could have, should haves, and things that you feel should have gone better.
Mhm.
And that really helps us to move forward and move through and beyond challenge. And it really relates to that idea of celebrating the wins,
Yes.
celebrating the small things, because that's there's power in that. And as human nature kind of pushes us oftentimes in the other direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not helpful.
No, gosh, no. I want to just back up just a bit to I wrote down these words. I wrote fun is in the building because that was as fast as it came out of my head. And what
Mm-hmm.
I mean by that is it's if I think about a sport like gymnastics or something,
Hmm.
it's if we woke up one day and became a gymnast and was great from the go. The best person from the go. And we got all the awards. Is there really a lot of fun in that?
Well,
Right?
so
To me, it was in the getting better at it that I
right,
was enjoying it. What do you have to say
right.
about that?
Well, that's a really good point, and I've seen that play out time and time again, and I really believe that when things come too easily, when you're winning everything from the get-go, it lacks a certain sense of meaning. Exactly. The fun is getting better. The fun is in the getting better. The fun is, you know, coming in third in one tournament and then getting runner up in the next. It's hitting those goals one at a time. But if all the goals are met with really out without trying, it's gonna lose a little bit of meaning. And then the trying oftentimes will decrease. If things come too easily to kids out of the gate, what's the point of trying? And then I'll tell you what'll happen. Those kids who are scrambling, those kids who are really working hard will keep working hard. Maybe they're overcompensating initially, but then their hard work is just their baseline. And then they're going to start winning. They're going to be the ones who move ahead. So, yeah, I think it's not a great thing when things come too easily.
It's the tortoise and the hare, right?
Yep.
The whole tortoise and the hare. The hare is like pew, 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 and then sits and can slack. And then the tortoise ends up beating the hare. Yeah, that's
Right.
so great. That's so great. So I have a question. If you have somebody who, because what is the name of your podcast again? I don't want to get it wrong.
Oh, sure. It's the optimized mind.
Okay, that's what I thought it was, but I didn't want to get it wrong. The optimized mind, which is such a powerful name. Like that was so well thought out, the optimized mind. And one of the things in optimizing our mind is really, to me, it's learning to dip into negative or limiting beliefs about self.
Mhm.
Do you
Yes.
have any recommendations or practices? Because I know for me, I can get into those little slumps. I have my own practices now and I can get out of them
Mhm.
faster than I ever could before.
Mhm.
But, sometimes just that monkey brain, that nasty ego talking to us, telling us that we suck, what can someone do if they find themselves in a space of I suckness and they really don't know how to get themselves out of it?
Right. So hard, right? And it's human nature. It's like all the things that are going wrong, going to focus on those, and then we're going to be stuck. So, a couple things, it's this idea, and I know that this sounds like a broken record, but of quieting our minds, of creating that space so that we can see our reality, see where we are with a little bit more perspective. So that's one thing. So
Mhm.
practicing some way of quieting our minds each day, again, getting out, exercising, that will really help us to sort of create space and clear our heads. And then jotting down 3 to 5 things at the end of each day that did go well, as opposed to just focusing on the things that didn't go well. And that will also sort of create some space, create some perspective for us to perhaps move beyond the stuck, or at least see where we are from a different angle, which will then help us move forward.
Yes. Dr. Joe Dispenza is famous for saying, where attention goes, energy flows.
Yes.
And for me, just bringing that into my mind and going, okay, what am I actually focusing on? And sometimes don't notice what I'm focusing on because it's so subconscious
Right.
until I feel like crap,
Right.
until I feel depressed, until I feel like
Yeah.
I can't do anything. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, bro, where's your brain been?
Got to take that
And
step back. Got to figure that out. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
and so my emotions are what alert me to I'm thinking yucky thoughts. And then I'll
Mhm.
stop and I'll say, okay, what have I been focusing on? Sometimes I'm astounded at what has
Right.
passed through my brain unrecognized.
Hmm.
I'm grateful for the fact that I can now course correct that. I can go back and say, okay,
Yes.
you were thinking this. And I often ask myself, is it true? Is it true?
Hmm.
Whatever
Yeah.
the question is. And if it's not absolutely factual truth, thank God for my logic. Because
Hmm.
my logic will say, that's ridiculous, Kristen. Are you kidding me?
Yes,
right?
precisely. And that's a really great skill to have, to be able to tune into that and actually shift gears. So that's awesome. I'm glad that that works so
Yes.
well.
So, Dr. Kate, we're coming near the end here of our episode together, which was just beautiful and brilliant. And there's so many nuggets in here and I will tell you this before we sign off. I know you guys, it seems like a broken record when I'm going to say we, because
Hmm.
they hear it from me all the time. Meditation, grounding, rooting, calming the
Right.
brain, slowing this junk down. There is
Yes.
something that it would not be as huge in the world as it is if it wasn't beneficial.
Right. Lot of power in that. So much.
Yeah. I mean, and try different things. There's not one size fits all. I've done all kinds of different things. I heard the word yoga nidra yesterday, and I was like, "Oh,
Mm.
what the heck is no yoga nidra?" And I look it up and I'm like, "I've been doing yoga nidra for 10 years. I didn't know what it was. I never knew it had a name." And that's just a meditation practice to everybody. But in closing, Dr. Kate, is there anything that, like, if there was one thing that maybe even a couple things, whatever comes to your mind, just let it flow, some things that you learned in your life that you're like, man, if I could drag this behind the blimp in the sky and so that people knew this or skywrite it, just one thing that you want to stand on the rooftop and shout to people, or two things, whatever comes to mind. What would you like people to know?
So yeah, two things. So really, the first is to appreciate your own context and don't be comparing yourselves to others. And then to always focus on the possibility on the other side of the challenge, both for yourself as well as for your kids.
Mm. Focus on the possibilities on the other side of the challenge. Can you expand that a little bit? That's
Sure.
juicy.
Well, yeah. So, we're all going to hit challenge. Challenge is inevitable. And challenge at points can shut us down. But we always want to hold on to that notion that once we figure out how to move through and beyond that challenge, there's a ton of possibility on the other side. And we never want to lose sight of that, even though in moments it feels easy to lose sight of it because maybe the challenge feels so big, or, we're just not in the space to figure out how to move through and beyond it in that moment. But I
Mhm.
promise you, there's always possibility on the other side of that challenge.
Oh gosh, I love that so much. One of the things I say to myself is, what are you supposed to be learning here? What are you supposed to be
Yes.
learning here? Because if
Yes.
there's a
Challenge as an
challenge,
opportunity.
oh, challenge is an opportunity. Do you have 3 more seconds to tell us about that?
Well, it's just that idea that, more times than not, or I would argue always, there's something to be learned from a challenge. There's something to be learned from moving through and beyond that challenge and ending up on the other side.
And it grows us, and I feel it up levels us, and that's where that maximum potential that is in this title comes from, is those that up leveling. We are actually heading towards our maximum potential. So, Dr. Kate, I
Yes.
just want to thank you so much from my heart for being with us today and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your heart with everybody in my community. And how can people get a hold of you? Like, what are you out there doing, and can they hire you? How does this work in your business?
Sure. Well, so my website is www.katelundspeaks.com, and they can find out more information. Basically, right now, I'm doing mostly speaking engagements, a little bit of coaching, but mostly speaking. And, I've got a book out there, Bounce, Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life.
What a great
And
title.
that's a fun one for folks to take a look at if they'd like. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn and happy to connect with folks there also.
And can they find all of these things via your website, katelundspeaks.com?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Kate, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it as well.